Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and welcome to episode 5 of our Plasticity Beginner Solid Modeling series. Now, this is going to be the last episode, and basically what we're doing is we're practicing some of the tips and techniques that we've learned in the first 4 episodes, and we're going to apply that to creating a model. Now, if you haven't seen any of the other episodes, you should still be able to follow along with this one, but just a reminder that in episode 1, we talked about starting shapes, things like primitives or curve-driven shapes. In episode 2, we got deeper into offsets and edges. How do we work with those kinds of details? Chapter 3 or episode 3, we looked more into things like arrays, patterns, and duplicates. In episode 4, we looked into adding details. So we talked more about the application of some of those tools. We saw a few new things like the Hollow tool, for example. In episode 5, we are going to be modeling some sort of sci-fi power cell. Now, it's just kind of a general thing, but we're going to look at different tips and techniques, offsets and extrudes, ways we can create pipes and routing, and overall just create a detailed model. Now, to get started, we are using Plasticity 1.4. If you haven't purchased Plasticity and you are thinking about doing it, remember that we are an affiliate, so the code LEAD10 at checkout will get you 10% off either the Indie or Studio versions. So I'm using version 1.4.19, and we're going to get started by selecting the cube and hitting delete. Now, just a quick reminder, if you are coming to this video and you've never touched Plasticity before, we do have a quick start video, and that will go over more of the UI elements, teach you how to use the basic functions of Plasticity. That's not the purpose of this video. We're looking more into workflows here, but we will still put all the shortcuts and things on the screen so that you can follow along. So the first thing that we want to do when we get started is pick a plane. Now, in this case, I'm going to use the number 1 on my numpad, which is my front view. And I'm going to use this as my starting point. I'm going to sort of drag it down into the lower left corner because we're going to be creating a revolve. Whenever we're working on a design, if there's symmetry, whether it is circular symmetry or if it's across a plane, we only want to work with the smallest portion of that because then we can add all the detail we want and simply pattern it if those details are replicated. So that's what we're going to be doing, starting with a basic line, start at the origin, drag it out to the right, and then we're going to begin creating this revolved shape. Now, you can do whatever you want with the details. I'm going to keep some of it fairly basic, and I'm not going to worry about dimensions. All we really care about is scale. So I'm going to come up in the Z direction, left click, and then work my way over to create sort of a little lip or a center section. I'm going to taper this down, come back and taper it out. Notice that there are some red lines on the screen. Those are default snaps. You can also go back to other geometry and tap the shift key, and that will enable snaps so we can find intersection points in 3D, for example. If I tap this line here, what we can do is we can find those intersection points vertically. That will help you just when you're laying out a design. If you want it to be more in line or more symmetric, then you can use those snap points. So then I'm going to bring this out a little bit farther to the right. I'm going to come up, back just a small amount, taper it outward, come up, over, down. We're going to make a tap shift here. We're going to make an inset section. That way we can put some vents and some grills in that area. We're going to come back up, left click, and we can add more detail later. So don't feel like you're going to get fixed into what we do here because we can manipulate all this geometry after it's created. We're just getting a good starting shape. Then I'm going to come down, make the major point of the cylinder, and finish this off. So once we have this, I'm going to select it, go to my revolve tool, and click 2 points on the x-axis, and now we've got our revolve. I'm going to keep that original polyline just in case I need it. Then I'm going to go to a top view, use my line tool, right click, and then hit C on the keyboard to cut and get rid of that right portion by just hitting delete, and I'll delete that line as well. So once again, whenever we have symmetry, we want to work with that. We want to make sure that we don't use too much geometry. We don't try to fill in too much area of the design when we can use symmetry, or we can use an array, we can use a pattern. So from the left-hand side, I'm going to change my selection to face selection. I'm going to drag a box from the top left to the bottom right, and then I'm going to use the move command, which is G and X, and just pull this out to the right to make this a bit longer. So even though I knew this section was going to be fairly long, it was difficult to get all of this extra detail inside of that original curve and then have this long section here at the origin. So after the fact, we can do that very easily. Left click to accept, hit 5 on your numbers, and that will bring back your all selection. Now, the next thing that I want to do at this point is I'm actually going to create a duplicate of this face here because we're going to add some detail. And basically what I want to do is create an outer shell. And when we look inside of this thing, we're going to see a bunch of pipes and details. So we're going to create all that detail on this surface, but then we need to have an offset of this. So I'm just going to duplicate it for right now with Shift and D, right click to accept. And I'm going to rename this. So double click on it. I'm going to say outside CYL for outside cylinder, and then hide it. We don't need to see it right now, but that way we have a good idea of where that original shape was. So the next thing is we're going to go back to a side view, and we need to start thinking about what details we want to add first. Now, when we think about details, we need to think about the way in which they're going to be created, the way in which we're going to replicate it, and some of the cautionary things that we need to think about. Now, when I say cautionary things, if we start to do things like imprints or projected curves, we're wrapping around a cylinder. So as those lines get distorted, and I'll go ahead and just do an example here. So if I come up and over, now we're not going too far up the cylinder. So if I were to imprint or project that onto the cylinder, then likely it would be fine. But let's just do a quick test. B on the keyboard for our fillet. We'll drag that up to around the corner, and Shift and I to imprint. Make sure that we select that. And you can see that as it gets up, it starts to stretch out a little bit. Now, if that curve was higher up, so G and Z, we move it up here, and actually let's move it back a little bit, G and X, Shift and I, and imprint it here, it starts to get stretched more. So if you're looking to keep a consistent radius for something like this, then wrapping it too high up the cylinder is going to be problematic. You may need to think about doing this from, say, a top-down view if you are not wrapping too far down the cylinder, or create it over here closer to that midpoint of the cylinder and then move it or rotate it up into position. So for us, we're going to Control Z to undo. We don't want those on the surface yet. That's just kind of an idea of what we're going to be going for. But the first detail I want to add is actually something slightly different. I want to add a vent in this area. Now, the way that we're going to do a vent is to cut out a section of it, and then we're going to build a surface, and that surface is going to have those extra details that we can then put on that face. So to do this, I'm going to start with a rectangle. Now, again, I'm not really concerned about specific dimensions, but if you are, then you want to be careful whenever you're clicking around, because you can see next to the cursor, it says face. So if I click right now, what that's going to do is it's going to place a point on that face. And because this is a rectangle tool, it's not going to be so much of a problem because it will still give us a closed profile. But if you were using something like the line tool and we just begin clicking, what's going to end up happening with that line tool is it's going to be in 3D. And a lot of times you'll find that you're not actually creating a correct profile. So pay close attention when you are creating these curves. If they're snapping to things like faces, one thing that we can do is we can hit the space bar. For example, we can come back here and we can create a new construction plane by hitting the space bar. And we can draw our rectangle over here and snap it to those edges. And then we can use offset, so O on the keyboard, and we can offset it inward to whatever we want. We can delete the original, and then we can get off of our temporary construction plane. So this is going to be on that plane and not floating out in space. Now, for our purposes, it actually is going to work either way, but just something to keep in mind because it's very easy to start to click and just put lines and points places and end up with them in random spots in 3D. And that's, of course, that's going to be a problem if you're trying to use it for something like an extrude or a revolve profile. So with this profile, we're going to do Shift and I to imprint onto our body here. And now you can see we've got that little division. I don't really need this, but I'm going to hide it for now. Remember that we can always get curves back. And if you've got these divisions and they're bothering you, sometimes you can just select and delete them, and that will let Plasticity sort of patch that area for you. So now that we've made this division, we're going to select the body, then select the face, Shift D to duplicate, which is going to create a copy of it, and then we're going to thicken this. So F on the keyboard is our find, Then we're going to start to type in thicken, which doesn't have a shortcut by default. And then we can pull this out in 3D. And this is going to be our little vent panel that's going to go on top of here. So go ahead and just rotate it around, see what it looks like. Right click to accept it. And then we're going to hide it for now. And we're going to take this face here. We're going to select it and hit E to extrude, which is going to pull it backwards. Now, the main difference here between extruding or just offsetting is that extrude is going to go normal to a plane. It's going to go in a single direction, in this case, in the Y direction. If we were to use offset, what's going to end up happening is these sides are going to be tapering inwards. Now, both options are perfectly fine. It just simply depends on what you want. And one thing that we do need to be aware of is that shape and our little panel here exactly match. And so probably the easiest thing to do is to select these inside faces and just rotate around, hold shift, and make this a little bit smaller so that they overlap. And then I'm going to round the corners off. While it's not required, it is kind of nice to just add these little details. If you select a wrong edge, you need to hold down Control to deselect it. And then we'll go ahead and pull those in, making that round. So now once we add the details to our vent plate, we'll be able to see through it into that little hole or that pocket. So let's hide the revolve. And actually, you know what? We haven't saved this thing yet. So let's go ahead and do a quick save. I am going to call this my SciFi power cell. I actually modeled something very similar already, but I wasn't happy with the results. So we're going to do something completely different. So next thing I want to do is I want to create some openings or some divisions on this. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is with the IsoParam tool. So Control R, and then I'm going to find the center, hold down Shift, and then use my mouse wheel. So when we do this, we want to think about the number of openings that we want. And you probably are going to need to count because there's no on-screen indicator of how many you have. I'm just going to roll the dice and hope that this works out. I'm going to left click. And this is going to give me all these divisions where I can push them through. However, it's not the whole thing because we need to divide it up vertically. Now, the problem here is if I hit Control and R and Tab for IsoParam, you can see that it's only going through this edge here. It's not going all the way through the object. So what we need to do instead is use our line tool. And I'm going to just draw a vertical line here. And actually, let's undo that. Let's go ahead and redo. Yeah, so we'll do Control and Y, see if that'll redo it. No, okay. Let's go ahead and let's do it again. So we're going to do Control and R, find the center, Shift and roll the wheel up, and left click to accept. And then we're going to draw a line, draw one over here. And then I'm going to duplicate that, so Shift D, and I'll just pull it over here. I'm not super concerned with making sure that everything is exactly spaced. Again, we're looking at concepts. If you do want to make sure that it's exactly spaced right, what you can do is tap Shift, draw a line here, and then we can do G, X, and tab over and move it a specified amount, so minus 0.01, for example, or let's see, minus 0.1. And that would move it over that specified amount, and we could do that on both sides. Again, for this, I don't really care that it's perfect. All I want to do is select this, Shift and I, imprint there, and do the same thing over here, and then I can get rid of them. So now what we have is a bunch of these divisions. One of the problems that we have with this is if I select a face and I begin pulling it through, notice that it's not cutting through the object. Now, the reason it's not cutting through the object is just based a little bit on the geometry. And we can select it and we can pull it outward and we can pull it inward a little bit sometimes, but it's failing with this geometry. So the way around this is to Shift select all the faces that we're interested in. And magically, I got the number right. We're going to do a duplicate, so Shift D. And then while those are all selected, and actually I'm going to have to go back and select them all here, hit F on the keyboard and we'll do thicken. And we'll pull them until they go all the way through. Then we want to select the original, hit Q, select these other bodies, Shift select, right click, and now we've made the holes in there. Now, the next thing that we need to do is round all the corners. This can get a bit tricky. I'm going to change my selections to edge here. And I'm going to start box selecting, holding down Shift, just working my way through. And for this first one, I'm going to drag them in until I'm happy with that shape. And then I'm going to hold down Control. So once we actually have a dimension value for that fillet, we're going to have to use Control to add to the selection because it temporarily disables the preview. And that lets me add extras here. Now we can't just drag a big box over all of these because it's going to include additional edges. So you will have to spend a little time to do this and just work your way around. Make sure that all of them are selected properly. Takes a little bit of time, but honestly, it's not too bad. We could have also created that first one, and we could have done a fillet on the solid, and then we could have patterned that with a radial array and cut it away. Depending on how many of these things you have to do, that might be a good option. For me, this isn't too bad. I'm just going to go ahead and add these, and we'll do the ones at the top as well. Select that and that, right click, and now we've got this panel here. Now, again, the divisions don't really matter. If they bother you, you can come back and select those. We're going to go back to our all selection, and sometimes you can just select these faces and delete those patches. There is an option to try to repair. Let's go ahead and search for that. I think that we can rebuild the body. Yeah, so let's try this. Let's select it, and let's see if rebuild will do anything. I don't think it will. There is another option. It's kind of escaping me at the moment, but I think we can rebuild this and clear those faces up. For what we're doing, it doesn't matter because in the end, what we're going to do is we're going to hide the edges, and yeah, it's not going to make a big deal. Last thing I want to do here is I want to chamfer that outside edge a little bit, and I want to possibly add some hardware to this. So I don't want to have it as a separate piece, but I want to maybe add a couple of rivets here. So that way I can just put something in the corner. Now this can be a little bit tricky to do. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to just use, let's just use the primitive cylinder. And let's make something fairly small. Rotate this around. It doesn't need to be very big at all. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to add a fillet to that outside corner. Just kind of round it off. And then remember that we've got our duplicate, which is Shift and D, but we've got duplicate with placement, which is Control D. And we need to select our face that we want to use for placement because this is tiny. We got to zoom way in. And I'll zoom back out, rotate this thing around and come over to here. We want to place it on the face, F to flip, and just kind of get into a position that looks right. Left click to accept. And then we've got the tool active. I'm just going to place them roughly in the location I want. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's put it down here. You may want to rotate it around. Looks okay. Left click to accept. And then we'll put one down here as well. Now, you can see that it's snapping to edges behind here. We can turn X-ray off, which will make sure that we don't click on edges behind the face. And then we'll hit escape. Zoom out, I'll turn X-ray back on, and then the original is still selected when we use this command, which is helpful because then all we need to do is hit delete. We don't need it, there's nothing linking those two together, but we do want to join these together so they're all one. So we'll hit Q on the keyboard. We're going to select each of these holding down Shift, and then hit Q again, right click, and now they've been added. So if we bring back the solid body, now we're looking into a darker area, and you can see that we've added this panel here. Now this panel can be joined to the rest of the body. If you're looking at doing some advanced materials later on, maybe you want to UV unwrap that specific section, you may want to keep it separate. You may even want to keep the heads of the rivets or bolts separate as well. For the purposes of what we're doing, I'm going to add them together. So Q, select this and hit Q again, because I don't need it to be a separate body. It's just that detail that we added there. And once we mirror this to the other side and we mirror it to X and Y, we're going to have 4 of those instances, and I don't really want to control 4 individual pieces and all the little bolts or hardware for it. So that's why I'm doing it this way. But again, if you've got some ideas downstream where you want to do different materials a little bit easier on individual bodies, by all means, keep them separate. Notice that here we've got multiple solids. We've got this joined together and then these extra little solids. So I'm going to just make sure that those are joined. And we're going to hit Q again. And we want to make sure that all of these pieces are selected. Let's go down here, hold down Shift, and select that as well, right click. And it's not adding them, which means that they're probably not touching properly. So with them selected, what I want to do is just grab them all here. I'm going to do G and Y and just move them in a little bit. And then shift select everything, QQ, right click, and now it added them together. So because I placed something that was flat on the surface of a curve, there was a gap between it and it wouldn't let me join it together. So just make sure you pay attention to that solids area and see how many bodies that you have that you're working with. With that detail, let's go ahead and do another quick save, make sure we don't lose any work. Now we're going to add some extra detail for things like pipes. Now remember, we do have a copy of this outside cylinder. That copy there, what we're going to end up doing is using that as a panel, so we're going to thicken it later. But for right now, we're going to use the surface of this solid as the starting point for where these pipes are going to go. Now remember, I said that we want some sort of overlapping pipes. We want things to be kind of in the center and we want pipes on the outside. So we're going to have them running a couple of different ways, and there are different ideas or different approaches you can take, but I'm going to just start with a simple line. I'm going to come over to this edge. So we're right here in the center, but I want to be above the center. I want to come out to the left, down, not to the center. So I'm going to tap shift to see where that center intersection is. And I want to come above that. And then I'm going to come all the way out to the left. And I'm just going to come out to the side here. B on the keyboard for our fillet tool. And we're going to round this out. While I said we're not going to pay close attention to dimensions, you want to get a rough idea as to the size of fillet you're adding, because that will affect the pipes or tubes that we end up using for routing here. So make sure that you just pay kind of a close attention to that. Right click, and now we've got this curve out in space. Because this is the first point that I snapped to, it's kind of floating out in space, but it is still flat, which means that we can use it to imprint or project. Now there are a couple of tools, so we can use imprint, which is Shift and I, which we've done before. If we use just the shortcut key I to project a curve, what this will actually do is this will just create a curve, and I'm going to hide this one for now. This will create a curve on the surface. Now the reason that this can be helpful is because now we can pattern that curve around the solid. Now, one of the downsides to this is when we pattern that curve around the solid, the fillets and things will start to overlap just because of the nature of the way this was done. But that is a valid option. What I'm going to do, however, is select this, use my pipe tool, I'm going to make the pipe larger. I'm going to go ahead and pull this till we're about there. What I'm going to do is about half of the radius that I added. So that's my target here. And this is going to be a new body. By default, it's going to be a new body. If you hit Q, it'll join it to the solid underneath, but we don't want to do that. So I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to hide the curve for now. I don't need to see the curve. It might be important in just a little bit, but for right now, I just want to hide it just so we can do something else. So from the side, I am going to hide the original for right now. And we've got this pipe and we've got this outside cylinder surface. Now, remember I said we're going to use that as a panel later, so we can hide that as well. What I want to do is I want to do a circular array of this. Now, when we do a circular array, this is a tool that I found kind of tricky when I was getting started, because in reality, what I would want to do is circular array about the x-axis. But what you'll notice is the cursor is sort of flat on the xy plane. So if I click here, what we're doing is we're creating a pattern about that point. So obviously, that's not going to work for us. Now, if we select the y-axis, again, notice that the way that it's pointing is pointing up, and it's just going to pick a different spot. So what I found the easiest thing to do was, if we have a solid body reference like this, just simply go to the center, and it's going to be kind of hard to see, but make sure that the cursor, where it says center, that the circle and the dot are in the correct orientation for you. So if I click here, now it's going to create a circular pattern around. I don't want to do this to 360. We can do 180, which is going to go around this way. If we do 90, that's going to allow us to do half of it. Now, and honestly, we don't really even want to go 90. What we're going to do is 45, and this is going to give us enough that we need. So once we've got that, we can then start to move everything. And actually, this just reminded me, before I do that, I'm going to escape, hide the solid, and we're going to extend the front and the back of the pipe, because we're going to have to move these. It's much easier if we do it to this one before we begin patterning. So grab that, just pull it out, bring the solid back, and then we'll do our radial array. So make sure you have the solid selected, radial array, select the center, we'll do 45 degrees, and right click. So the main reason that we did this is because these pipes are going to need to overlap. So I'm going to select all of these. We're going to say G, X, tab, and then we're going to enter a manual value. So if I do 0.25, you can see based on the numbers that gave me about enough space. So again, tab 0.25, 0, and then hit enter a couple times to accept that. And then we're going to continue to do this just with all of them, work our way around. Now, once we have all of them selected, and it's probably easier just to do it this way, we can do G, X, tab, 0.25, enter, enter, enter. And then we'll do a box select here, G, X, tab, 0.25, hit enter 3 times, and just keep working your way. G, X, tab, 0.25, and then again, this one, G, X, tab, 0.25. Now here is where getting comfortable with the shortcut keys makes a big difference, because if I had to come down here and find move, then I had to click on X or come over here and manually enter X, hit 0.25. It just takes a little bit longer, where GX tab 0.25 is pretty quick. So basically what we've done is we've wrapped those around, and we can see that we've got them sort of staggering, they're rotating around the cylinder. That's going to give me that good sort of detail that I want. Now I just need to trim the ends. Now the way that we're going to trim the ends is with a line. I'm going to start here, create a vertical line there. We'll do that again over here, vertical line, and then we'll do C, select all of these, right click. Now one of the nice things about how Plasticity works this is all of the extra pieces are still selected, so all we have to do is hit delete. So once again, we'll select the curve, C, box select, enter. This time it's selected the wrong sections, but we can just drag over here and delete. Go ahead and delete those curves. And now I am going to take all of these. Let's go ahead, and we were kind of close to the center. So what I want to do is rotate these with R on the keyboard. I want to reset my pivot point, which if you look down in the bottom right hand corner is going to be V. We're going to put that at the center here, and then we're going to rotate these down. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to leave a little bit of space down here, but I want to get them away from the center. So let's just do 15 degrees and hit enter. With all of those selected, next I'm going to mirror them about Z, right click, and I've added them to the top. So really all we did here was we made one pipe that was done with projecting the curve, again, I on the keyboard. We created one, extended it out, and then we patterned that with a radial array. We moved them into position, which took a little bit of manual work, and then we created a mirror version of it on the top. Now, of course, when we flip to the other side, what's going to end up happening is we will just have those on the other side. We don't need to do any extra work here. Let's do a quick save. This is going to be a single layer. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is select this surface, and I'm going to pull it inward. Now, the reason I'm going to pull it inward is because now I want to create some pipes going different directions. Now, we're going to add extra details in a little bit, but now we just need another reference surface. This can be done a little bit easier because I can use ISO curves, or IsoParam, Control and R, hit Tab, which will make it go vertically. I can hold the Shift down and rotate this a little bit and just kind of figure out where you want these, and then select this curve and again use the pipe tool. I'm going to pull that out until it's large enough. We're not going to be cutting it away. It's a new body, so B on the keyboard. Now, one of the main differences here is because we're using a division or an edge, it's assuming that we want to cut it away. Now, before we had a curve, and the curve just assumed that it was a new body. So just keep that in mind. And now that we have this, actually, I don't even need to worry about repeating that. I'm just going to do a rectangular array. And I am going to select the x-axis and hold down the shift, rotate that around. Actually, let's make more so they're kind of a little bit closer together. And then I am going to hide the original solid. And I want to get rid of all of these extra pieces that I don't need. Just delete them and bring that solid back. So remember what we're working toward is we're going to have these sort of overlapping pipes. Now they're relatively close. They're not touching. You can see that it's a little bit different. But again, when we look at this from afar, it's not really going to matter too much. So that looks pretty good so far. Just gives me some detail on the inside. And then I can take this and I can pull it in even farther. And we're not going to be able to see much on the inside of this design. But what I want to do now is I'm going to select this and I'm going to shift select all of these as well. So I'm going to rotate this around and box drag and just hit Q and Q just to join them together. So now this should just leave all these other pipes here, which if we want to, we can join them because they all do touch this face. So we can select everything at this point, hit Q and Q, and it should join them as long as they're touching. It looks like they may be a little bit off. I'm going to pull that way and then right click to accept, shift select everything and do Q and Q, right click. So it looks like it's not adding them in. Let's try again. So Q, and if I select this and hit Q again, and then shift select each of these just to be sure it's getting them. Let's go ahead and work our way around. And again, when you're doing this, if you have some downstream materials that you want to add, then you may want to keep them separate. But for our purposes, I want to just join them all together. It's going to be much easier. So now we've got some of those overlapping pipes. And we've got our cylinder here. This is going to be, again, it's a panel. So we're not going to see everything inside, but the panel is going to be a little bit larger. We want to add a couple of other details. But for the most part, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to hide that and focus my attention on adding some more details to the front. So things like extra panels that we want to pop up. So I'm going to do this with a rectangle. Let's do it from the top. So 7 on the numpad. And I'm going to do a rectangle here. Right click, O to offset. Offset it inward. And then we'll get rid of this one. And then I want to shift an I. And then I can get rid of the curve. Now I've got this extra little piece here. Now the reason I want to do this is because I can pull this out. And that's going to give me some extra little pieces that are just going to add to what we're doing here. So we'll round the corners off. I'll select the outside face, O to offset, and pull that in, right click, pull it down a bit. And again, it's just adding a little feature. Now, if we want to do additional features, we can do them as offset surfaces like we did before. So if I wanted to add something, let's just say in the middle down here, right click to accept, O to offset, pull that in, we'll get rid of the other one, Shift I to imprint, get rid of our curve, and then we'll select the face and duplicate it. So Shift D, right click to accept, and then F and thicken. So we can pull this out. Remember, we can also extrude it. So once we thicken it, then I can add additional details. So I'm going to round all the corners. Go ahead and pull those in. We can offset that face. We can maybe pull it out a little bit, offset it again. So O on the keyboard. Pull it out just a little bit. And then for these corners, just go ahead and select them. Because the offset got to the point where that fillet disappeared, I'm going to add a chamfer. And now this is a solid body, which means we can do a radial array if we want. So find that center. In this case, we only want to go maybe 30 degrees and maybe have 2 of them. Actually, we can go 45, maybe have 3 of them. That looks pretty good. Let's go 60, and let's add 4 of them. All right, I'm good with that. So again, just some little details. Now select the main body, Q, And then we're going to select each of these, holding down Shift, hit Q again to join them. And now we've just got that one solid body. Now, some of the other things we might want to do is potentially add some indents or some recesses up front. Once again, the main way that we might want to do this is by creating a solid body that we can pattern and remove. So we can do this with Control and R, again, IsoParam. Hold down Shift, and I'm going to find the mid. So let's see, center here. Right click to accept. And then I'm just going to work my way and select every other one. And this is going to take a little while. Just rotate it around. You can speed things like this up with changing your selection filters, like face selection. And maybe we'll pull this one down as well. So you can pull this in slightly. And again, it just gives a little bit more of just details on the end. So I think the last thing I want to do before I start patterning this main body is just clean up some of the edges. Maybe add some small chamfers everywhere, just to, not that edge. I'm going to Control select that edge. Just to take off these sharp corners. So we'll go here, maybe here as well. And Control select here. That's probably a bit too much. Get rid of that one. That looks pretty good. This one, Control select to get rid of. Add this one. All right. Also, I think I want to take this in a bit deeper, so I'm just going to pull that back. Actually, let's go ahead and just take it all the way through. All right, as I'm looking at this, I think I want to repeat this on this face here. So Control and R, find the center, Shift, left click to accept, and then once again, just work my way around, just grabbing these faces here. Remember that turning X-ray off can help, especially if you find yourself selecting through a bunch of things. Pull those in, right click. There we go. So I think this is probably good. We could, of course, I mean, we're almost 40 minutes in. We could, of course, add more details like little hex pieces for fittings or nozzles at the end. Now, that kind of thing really should be done before you begin patterning. It's just much easier. But for right now, I think we want to take this body and we want to mirror it. We're going to go across Y. We're going to join them together so we can hit Q, right click. And this should leave us with one solid body. And then we're going to do the same thing across the X axis. And again, we're going to hit Q to join them together, right click. And this leaves us with one single solid body. Now remember, I did say that we're going to be creating a panel. So this panel is going to have to be sort of made a little bit bigger. So we could select it, select the face. This is going to be hard to do with the solid here. Select it, select the face, and begin pulling it out, offsetting it. Right click to accept, and then just make sure that it's outside of everything. It looks like it is. And then we're going to thicken it and cut it away. So you can either trim it now and then thicken, or you can thicken it and then start cutting it away. Whatever works for you, really just, it's personal preference. And this is a part where if we don't want to have symmetry everywhere, we can start making it a bit more unique. So from the side, I'm going to hide the solid. But I think what I want to do is use my knife tool, so K on the keyboard, and I'm going to start cutting maybe just some little sections. And I'm going to hit tap Shift and maybe assume that these are potentially little access panels. So then I can delete that face. So what we want to do is if we hit delete on a surface or a sheet like this, it's not going to try to patch it. But what we want to do is select it and use Alt-J to unjoin. And that's going to make that an individual piece there. All right, so that allows me to cut that away. So again, I can kind of see into what's going on. Because we had so much detail over here, I really want a panel there as well. I'm going to turn off X-ray so I'm not selecting anything through. Grab my line tool again and K for knife. And I want to just try to mimic this. I don't have to, but I can tap Shift if I want to try to get it to be parallel. You can see that there's sort of that parallel here. But just kind of get it close. Tap Shift if we want it horizontal. Again, because we're working on concepts, it doesn't really matter. But and come up, maybe over a little bit so we can see what's going on here, and maybe cut all the way out of the top. All right, and then Alt-J to unjoin and delete. So that lets me see into it a little bit. And I think I want to cut out a bit more on that side as well so we can see those details. If you want to do this with just, say, a rectangle, what we can do is, we can use G on the keyboard to alter that if we want to. I think that using line tools is pretty helpful. And you can use the knife tool to just do it directly. So K on the keyboard. And maybe we'll just create something out of here. Maybe just odd shape again. I don't know. We'll just work our way around. And Alt-J. And delete. So that looks pretty good so far. I'm just going to take this and mirror it across Y. Hide the solid for now. Let's go ahead and hide that. J to join those together. And let's mirror this direction. And then we will join these together. So J on the keyboard. And then mirror them in this direction on X. And we'll join them together. So Q, union works for sheets as well. And then when we take a look, you can kind of see we're looking inside of that. Now you can take this entire thing and thicken it. So F on the keyboard, thicken, and we'll pull it out as a solid. So begin dragging it out. And there we have it. Now this could be joined together. So we can select both of these and join them so we just have a single solid body as long as they overlap. And then if you want to go back and add more details, so for example, O to offset, let's offset this face, see if we can get it to offset. This might be a bit tricky. Select that face, O to offset. Yeah, it doesn't want to do too much, but we can get some. And then with the offset, what we can do is we can select that intersection and we can pull it in just a little bit. And when we turn our edges off, then you can kind of see, well, let's make it red. You can kind of see that it's giving a little bit of extra detail there by using that offset. Let's do that on the top as well. Let's go back here. And O to offset. It doesn't do much, and part of the reason for that is over here. Right-click to accept. And we'll pull that in just slightly to cut it away. And we'll do the same thing over here. Now, again, you can do this before you pattern. It's probably better to do that. Pull that in. Right-click to accept. Left-click to select that face and just pull it in slightly. And we'll do one more over here. O for offset. Again, dragging it up. Right-click to accept. And then we'll just pull that in slightly. So again, we're just adding those extra little details there. So that way, when we do turn the edges off, it doesn't just look like a flat piece. It does give a little bit of thickness. It's very minor, but that kind of thing will show up when we're rendering. Now we can kind of see inside, see some of the pipes. We don't really have all of the details for what we created, but at certain angles, you can kind of start to see those. And of course, you can spend a bit more time and cut more sections out if you want. But I think overall, I think that we achieved the goal. We added detail using mostly those simple tools that we learned in the other ones. I'm going to hit 5 on the numpad to go into perspective, just give it a little bit better of a look. And we'll go to that red color. And there we go. So out of all the tools that we used, they were mainly things like using the imprint, which is Shift and I. We used some basic curves, mostly lines. We didn't really add any splines or any arcs. We did everything with straight lines and then filleted them. We used the IsoParam tool, Control and R. We used the pipe tool quite a bit for a lot of those details. we duplicated faces, bodies, moved them around, rotated them, and made arrays of patterns. But hopefully that you can see that with just a small toolbox of tools, just a handful of things, you could apply them in ways that you can add a lot of detail. You can have overlapping features like the panel on the outside that lets us look into the details that we saw, and just play around with it. Learn to use these tools, learn to play around and add those details. And even the grill that we added, being able to see into that darker section there, again, that adds a lot of realism because it's sort of bumped off the surface there. Now, this was about 45 minutes. In reality, without narrating through this, you could probably do this on your own in about 10 minutes. So once you're comfortable with those tools, and if you have an idea of what you want your object to look like, you could really speed through this in about 10, maybe 15 minutes without any problem. So it really does pay to learn the shortcuts that you want to use, to learn how to apply them, and have a good idea of the object that you're trying to create. Now, if you're just playing around with shapes, it's perfectly fine as well. I didn't have a drawing or an image or anything of what this looked like before I modeled it. I had an idea of some of the features I wanted to do, like the pipes inside there and some of the indents here and this vent or this grate here. I knew that I wanted those details on the model, but I didn't have an idea of what this final thing was going to look like. So we're just kind of playing around with shapes, but that's also a great way to explore the tools as well. Now, hopefully throughout this series, or even if you just watch this episode alone, you got an idea of just a common workflow that you can use in Plasticity. You have some tips and tricks and some tools that you can use constantly. Now, if you do take a look in the description of the video, I am going to also list the shortcut keys, or at least the most common ones that we use throughout this video, so that you can go back to them if you want. And there are going to be documents. There's an unofficial Plasticity webpage where you can see some of those shortcuts as well. They aren't updated every version, so again, it is unofficial, it is user run, but it is a great place to start if you are looking for that. If you have any questions on anything we did here, then please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.